subsidize or find ways, offer automobile availability programs, or helping people with their financing of automobiles, or whatever it is, to help people gain access to opportunities that assume that you have an automobile. So it's the urgency of the issue. Yes. You know what, I'll take one more question and then we better move on to Margi and we'll...
Next presenter will address my question. But in the very first presentation, you said that the inner city, or the city, is a very important part of the development or existence of revitalization and so on. In this one, you're saying that poor people, or people with low income, or people of color, et cetera, need automobiles, et cetera, it's dollars. But my question is, are you eventually going to get to the place where you can show how all this will link together to get to the initial premise where you revitalize the city, because the inner city or the city is an important dream for continued development?
That's a great question. Yeah, that's a good segue. That's an excellent question, and it's right on the money. Yeah, I'll help with this.
I'm Margi Dewar. I'm a professor in urban planning and also the faculty director of the University of Michigan's Ginsberg Center for Community Service and Learning. So what we've done so far is June talked about the importance of cities in the world, in the nation, and in the state, and took a look at state policy. And then Joe looked at the region and how urban residents or city residents fit into taking advantage of the many opportunities that exist across a region instead of just within a city boundary. So we've kind of gone like this and focused a little more closely, and now I'm going to talk about a city itself, and with much of my emphasis on Detroit. So our state's historically industrial cities, as many of you know well, have lost a very high percent of their population and their employment over the last 30 to 50 years. And this has meant that they then experience loss of demand for property and therefore disinvestment in housing and in commercial and industrial buildings, and eventually abandonment and vacant land, so that we end up with cities that have a large amount of vacant property. So essentially, in this state, one of the most important issues to consider for our historically industrial cities, so that leaves out, for instance, Ann Arbor, but many others are in this category. It means that we're thinking about, okay, how do we remake our cities after abandonment? Because that's what it's gone through. So there are three questions in my mind about this. And a cluster of faculty and students at the University of Michigan are trying to investigate these questions. The first one is, what do the abandoned sections of our cities become? What goes on there? There's still something there. But we don't look at them very often. We often have much more focus on, say, downtown or the riverfront or something. And then second, why are these the outcomes? Given the same market conditions, what political, social, institutional, legal factors make a difference in what these cities become? And this is very interesting to people in my field and anyone interested in policy, because this is where you can identify the levers that can make a difference in what these areas become. And then third, what should the city become? We ought to be envisioning a future for these cities. So what I'm going to do now is give you a closer view of Detroit. Now that was a lot brighter on my screen than it is for you. But this is last summer, or the end of last summer, August and September, we did a Detroit residential parcel survey, and there was an effort to visit and assess the condition of every single one of the 340,000 plus residential properties in the city. And what we found, and we as a whole coalition of the Detroit Economic Growth Corporation and others, so I don't just mean me, but we found that right now there are about 91,000 vacant lots in the city, so about 27% of the city's residential properties are vacant lots, and there are about 31,000 vacant structures on residential properties, so about 9% of the city's residential properties have vacant structures on them. Not all of those are ones that need to be demolished, though about a third are. So what we see is that we're still on our way to more vacant land and more abandonment. So what do this is the distribution of abandoned or empty lots and empty structures is not even across the city. And this shows the grayish color is vacant land, so you can see concentrations through here, a concentration here, but the yellow is residential occupied property. So you can see that there are concentrations of the city where this disinvestment has occurred. And this is zooming in on this area, which is Northwest Detroit's Brightmoor section. This is work some of my students did. This is a figure ground map where a student outlined the rooftops of every building on an aerial photo. And so then where there are many of the houses remaining, you can see the clear outline of the streets still, because the houses there are a lot of houses there. But in the middle of Brightmoor, the streets fade away because there are so few buildings left. This is a very empty area. So then, if we zoom in further into that very empty area of Brightmoor, we start seeing this is just one example of what abandoned areas become. Homeowners are making themselves new situations. So these orangish blocks in the map are what my students call homesteads. They are places where homeowners have taken over at least 3 properties adjacent to their homes to make themselves a new kind of, well, one of my colleagues calls it the new suburbanism, because it's really large properties controlled by homeowners when adjacent homes were disinvested and torn down. So people are making the best of what have been difficult situations for many of them. So we're continuing to work on figuring out what is it that's going on, who owns the property. A lot of it is city-owned or state-owned, county-owned property, as well as owned by nonprofits. But I'm going to go on to talk more about what makes a difference in what cities become after abandonment. That's the area where we can kind of start seeing some policy levers. When property is abandoned, the owner stops paying property taxes, and then the property moves into the ownership of the county or the county in this state under current law. In the past, it also before the law changed, it was the state or the city. So then the property is offered for auction. If it doesn't sell, it remains in public ownership. So at some point it moves from the prior ownership into public ownership and then out to something else. And that's sort of the juncture where we can